54. The Militarization of Life. Chalcedon Position Paper number 100, August 1988. Reality is unpleasant for fallen man because it is not his creation. A world I never made is what most people do not want. As a result, they prefer to live by their own myths in terms of what they imagine reality to be or what it should be. Because the 20th century seeks aggressively to live without God, to live profanely, it is especially prone to myths. Myths can kill you because falsifications of reality mean the risks of disaster and death. More and more various states are built on myths. A common myth insists that all wealth comes from the workers, and that capitalists are parasites who contribute nothing and take almost everything. This myth is common to most nations. Thus, in the United States, when students and voters have been asked what corporate profits amount to, the answers run from 25 to 75% of the net. In reality, during better and freer years, they ran 4 to 6%, and they are now commonly 2 to 2.5%. Quote, excessive profits, end quote, are usually a myth. When the Russian Revolution resulted in the Bolsheviks' triumph and the seizure of businesses and factories, this myth led to remarkable incidents. The workers expected to find vast wealth in gold and paper in the seized offices and found nothing. They searched carefully for all the, quote, ill-gotten wealth, end quote, supposedly seized from the workers' sweat and blood, and they found none. The communist workers filed reports like this. I arrived at the factory and began to exercise control. I broke open the safety vaults, but could take no account of the money. There was no money to be found there. James Bunyan, The Origin of Forced Labour in the Soviet State, 1917 to 1921, 1967, page 24. The communists tried to run the shops and factories, but they failed to recognize the central role of capitalization and management in production. As a result, production collapsed, and the Soviet Union was very quickly in a major crisis. They had the workers and they had the plants, but no production. If myths had not governed the Bolsheviks so thoroughly, they would have recognized the fallacy of their theories. This they were not ready to do. The fault could not be in Marxist theory, which, in their thinking, was reality. As a result, God's reality had to be corrected to conform to Marxism. The problem, created by Marxism, had to be resolved, but only on Marxist terms. This was like saying that the cure for poison is more poison. Lenin, by late 1919, recognized the vast dimensions of the crisis and the growing economic collapse. He turned to Leon Trotsky, who was then the People's Commissar of War and chairman of the Revolutionary Military Council of the Republic. Trotsky came up with a plan, with 24 propositions or theses in good Kantian Hegelian Marxist style. The essence of Trotsky's plan was the radical militarization of all Soviet labor, urban and rural, commercial, industrial, scientific, educational, and agricultural. This meant the end of the freedom to change jobs at will, an end to all strikes, and an end to any freedom for labor. Later, of course, Stalin and Trotsky clashed, and Trotsky lost. The Soviet Union, however, never has abandoned its Trotskyite militarization of all labor. It is basic to the Soviet Union. The slave labor camps represent the ultimate in the militarization of labor. Because of Trotsky's logical development of Marxist theory, the worker's destiny in the worker's paradise is slavery. Of course, productivity has declined in every segment of the Soviet economy. Slavery has never been an effective form of labour, and the Soviet Union is a classic example of its incompetence and inefficiency. The premises of Marxism, however, were not the exclusive property of Marxists. They were shared by Western liberals such as the British Labour Party and the followers of Woodrow Wilson in the United States. Thus, when President Franklin Roosevelt took office during the Depression, he turned at once to the military model. He also turned to an army officer, General Hugh S. Johnson, to head up the National Recovery Act, 1933 to 1934. Johnson proceeded, he was a lawyer also, to lay down the law to businessmen like an occupation army chief. Very few, like Walter Chrysler, were ready to stand up to him. Roosevelt's military model destroyed many small businesses before the Supreme Court voided the NRA. Faith in the military model did not die, however. Both Republican and Democratic administrations have turned to it repeatedly, and the courts now view it benignly. The military model is thus being applied to every sphere of life: business, education, religion, everything. Controls are the answer to all problems. American productivity has declined, as has American education. This same decline, with the same cause, the militarization of national life, is occurring in countries all over the world, and with the same ugly results. In no country do the politicians seem ready to recognize the stupidity of the Trotsky plan for productivity. Ironically, the militarization of national life has gone hand in hand with the demilitarization of the military. In the Soviet Union, political commissars saturate the military with their presence and hamper military common sense. In the West, the military has also been politicized in one country after another, in some nations to a startling degree. In the name of civilian control, the military has been politicized. In all this, only one group apparently retains power and trust: the theoreticians. Where reality has its slimmest hold, there the greatest power resides. In all this, it is clear that, first, God has no place. Men are determined to play God. They believe that their theories can create a new and better reality, and they see wisdom as born with them. For freedom to militarize men and institutions more effectively, the, quote, superstitions, end quote, of Christianity must be eliminated, they maintain. In one nation after another, the war on Christianity begins with an attack on cults, and the definition of cults is soon expanded to include Christianity. The US Congress is now talking about the need to do something about, quote, cults, end quote. If, as Congress insists, it must be, quote, neutral, end quote, with respect to religions, why should some be labelled cults and singled out for national hostility? Second, the militarization of society means a radical distrust of freedom. Almost 20 years ago, I was one of 3 men speaking at a well-attended forum with a distinguished professor presiding. My subject was freedom in education. When the session ended, one state schoolteacher, who had not gained recognition during the question and answer time, came up indignantly to accuse me of quackery for talking about freedom. She said, "In the modern world, freedom is obsolete. In a scientifically governed social order, All factors had to be controlled to produce valid results, and freedom was thus an obsolete and non-valid concept. This is the faith of all too many today. Of course, most such believers would resent the Trotskyite term of militarization. They prefer to use the concept of a scientifically governed and controlled social order. Whichever term is used, the results are the same. Freedom is replaced with controls. The controls are man-made controls. They are means whereby man seeks to create new terms and conditions for living and to remake the world. Man's dream, quote-unquote, reality or utopia replaces God's creation. Instead of original sin as the problem, such men see God and His law as the problem. In October 1837, the United States Magazine and Democratic Review carried a long statement expressing the Jacksonian democratic faith. The author was probably the political editor, John O'Sullivan. He held, "Democracy is the cause of humanity. It has faith in human nature. It believes in its essential equality and fundamental goodness." This, for him, was the governing principle in terms of which all history has to be rewritten. At the same time, other theoreticians of Jacksonian democracy were exerting, as Gilbert Veal did in 1832, and again in his Manual of Political Economy, a supplement to the Diamond, in 1841. We find it gravely asserted, and almost uniformly acted upon, that the majority should govern the minority. And this is the key to all the miserable legislation in the world and the foundation of most of the evils. This is the father of the religious and political persecutions and the grand impediment to improvement. What is this governing majority but a subversion of all justice? Thus, long before Trotsky, and in terms of Rousseau, men were promoting the suppression of the popular will in favour of an imaginary general will. Their ideas from Rousseau on called for one quote-unquote logical solution: the militarization of life and society. The conclusion to all such efforts, however, is not life, but death. It is the fool who says in his heart, "There is no God." Psalm 14, verse 1. God, who sits in the heavens, shall laugh, the Lord shall have them in derision. Psalm 2, verse 4.